Welcome to this video, thank you for joining me. On this video today we are going to be painting a Kestrel on linen board with gouache. So these are the colours that I'm going to use, and they are ultramarine blue, vermilion red, mid yellow, white and black. And the brushes I'm using are a flat square brush, quite a large one, not too big, a small round brush and a medium sized another round brush too. We'll start off with sketching the Kestrel on the board. So I'm using a 3B graphite pencil, it's a mechanical pencil, but I would usually, if I was drawing on paper, I would use like a 2B just to keep it light, but because this is on linen board it needs something a little bit darker than would be okay on the white paper, so I'm using a 3B rather than like a 2B. When I'm sketching, especially when it's painting, I don't do everything correctly. I'm not copying the reference photo as literally like what I see it. It's only a reference, it's not going to be a photorealistic rendition of this Kestrel put onto the linen board. I'm going to start by painting it in the light areas with a washed out white. The lights of the bird are the most prominent shapes to me, so if the darks of the bird were, dark shapes of the Kestrel were more prominent to me, I'd probably mark those in first, but as soon as I get some paint onto the surface it becomes a little bit more relaxed for me, so I'm not worrying about ruining it or mucking it up. It's just sort of breaking that barrier between the nice new canvas and putting on those first marks. I'm only really creating a base coat, a base layer of white paint onto the canvas. If you do find that the darker areas are more prominent to you, then go over with like a dark grey or a dark blue. Use some of that ultramarine with a touch of black. But for me, the lighter areas of the feathers around the eyes and the beak were the most prominent parts, so that's where I began painting. And again, keeping it loose, not fussing with any detail at all. Now that I've got some white down, I'm going to look at the eye and the beak. I start by putting down a black or a very, very dark grey. I'm going to call it black, but it is more of a dark grey, dark blue colour, so that ultramarine mixed in with a little bit of black. It gives it a nice cool colour, and when we're putting on the oranges and the yellows of the feathers, we need a little bit of cool in there, so it balances it out quite nicely. Here I'm just beginning to layer up the lights in the eye and the beak. You can do this whilst the black or the dark colour is still wet, or you can wait for it to dry and use like a light grey or a light blue colour. I quite like the light blue, so I think it's just a different highlight colour, and just start to mark in the highlights in the eye and the beak. Now that we've got some colour down for the eye or for the shape of the eye, we can start looking at around the eyes. That's the colour we need to get in now, is that light yellow, because it's a prominent part of the bird. At this stage we're just starting to mark in those prominent areas of dikes and larks and the colours, so that we've just mapped everything down. Once we get all the colour down and the base layers, we can start to refine it later on. Now the Winsor & Newton white I had was really quite thick. It was very hard to get out the tube, and that's probably because I didn't do the tube up correctly. But what I like about gouache is it's like watercolour. It doesn't dry so that you can't use it again. Gouache is like that happy medium between acrylic and watercolour. You get the pigmentation and the thickness of the acrylic, but you can re-wet it so you can activate the gouache again on the page, so you can get it like a wash, but you can also blend the colours through better than when acrylic has dried. Watercolour probably won't work as well on the linen board. I haven't tried it, but if you wanted to try it, do go ahead and try it, but I think the gouache is that perfect medium to use, especially on this linen board. Anyway, getting back to it, now that I've put in those yellows, I've started to map out the eye a bit more. I'm going to leave that be and let that dry, and I'm going to move on to the darker areas of the head. So you've got a dark grey with a hint of blue. The blues are really nice, and you really ought to use that ultramarine blue mixed with a tiny bit of black, and even a small amount of white, just to make that blue-grey colour. It just offsets against the whites and the warm colours really, really well. And I think that's a great base to put down. At this point, like I said, just get it on there. Just slap it on, let it dry as a base coat. These aren't the final layers. We don't need to go in with a small paintbrush and paint every little detail. every little feather at the moment. It's just a layer. Just get the colour down. Now once you've gone in with that dark colour, you let it dry, and then you can build up the lights, which will define the feathers. Add a little bit of lighter orange down the belly. That just defines it away from the very dark feathers on the Kestrel at the moment. So just mark that in with the colour. And because the body now needs to dry, we can go back to the eye and just start fiddling around a bit more with some of the detail. At this point, just play around with it, tweak it, see what works. If you don't like some of the shape of the eye, re-wet it, or just add a little bit more paint and just move it around slightly. There's an area of the eye that's really quite dark, so I wanted to get that in with more of a neater black than a blue-grey mix. It's not an exact copy, and we don't want it to be an exact copy of the reference photo. You know, we're painting a Kestrel. No one's going to see that reference photo. This is your painting. And I think that's the most important thing, that you don't forget that this is your painting. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine, and really it shouldn't. The colours that I'm using, I will try to use throughout the whole bird, but I don't mean like ultramarine neat or vermilion red neat. I mean, as I mix these colours on the palette, I've still got some of it left on my paintbrush once I've done that specific area that I've made it for, so I will try to blend it through the rest of the feathers or the body, because I want these colours to flow through the bird. I don't want it to be patchy and have blue there, red there, orange there. It needs to merge together in a way so that the colours just go throughout the bird and makes it look more natural. Now I'm adding in the nostril, and it's quite a dark colour. It's a dark brown, so I've mixed the red, yellow, a little bit of black, just to create a more dark brown colour, and that's how I'm going to put in that nostril. As you can see, I'm actually touching the page with my hands and my fingers, and that's really just to take away some of that paint. If I think it's a little bit too dark or a little bit too thick, I just touch it and bring it away. You can do this, but it might be better to do this with a paper towel or sponge or a cotton ball or something like that. But for me, it's habit to work with my hands, because I usually work with charcoal or pastel. I'm touching the page directly and then I'm taking it away, blending it through. Whereas with paints, unless you're finger painting, you're using a paintbrush or you're using another tool that takes you away from that material. So for me, it's habit, but I think it's probably best that if you need to take away some of that paint, you use a cotton bud or maybe a bit of kitchen towel. I put that yellow again through the lighter part of the cheek, where I've had that white area planned out. It's quite a strong yellow, so I took it away a little bit. It just needed knocking back, but it needed to have a little bit of colour there, a little bit of warmth, because I think it was too bright white, it was too stark. So I worked with the gouache almost like a glaze. I've just taken a thin layer of that coat over just to put some colour in there. At this point I thought the Kestrel looked rather cute, which they are cute birds. Because I think they're cute birds, that comes through my painting. You know, if you think they're angry birds, you'll get a sense of anger in your painting. But I do think they're cute. But for this, I actually wanted more of a serious look too, and I wanted him to look more like a hunter rather than come and cuddle me and you know, give me a hug. So I needed to change the expression slightly, and this really is personal preference, but for me I needed just to change the look in the eye slightly. So I was happy with the highlights, but it was the shape of the eye that I think needed to be changed. So what I did is I brought down the feathers above his eye and cut the top of the eye off, so it looks like he's sort of not scowling so much, but just a little bit more fiercer than what I originally had him looking like. I will work on that again later on in the video. But you know, you get to a point where you are happy with the look of the Kestrel in its eye, and the eye is the most important part of it. The rest of it could be a complete mess really, but if you have that look in the eye, you've created a very successful painting. Also, the bottom highlight of the eye had an orange going through it, so I worked with an orange as a glaze again, just putting a little bit on top of that white so it gets some of that reflection from the eye, from around the eye, which, you know, that yellow rim. It's just putting some of that into the eye itself, so it does look like that reflection. You have to make sure that once you reach a point and you don't want to do any more blending, you let it dry. It does reactivate it if you put the water back on, and it will still blend it through, and you are at risk of making it go a little bit muddy and a little bit messy. So once you're happy with it, and at regular intervals throughout the painting, make sure that you put the paintbrush down, let it dry, go and make a cup of tea, and just let it be for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes until that paint is actually dry. So I'm happy with the head at the moment as it is. We can just put that to the side, and we'll work now on the body. Start with putting in the greys with the hints of blue and also the oranges and yellows. The feathers of the kestrels have this lovely deep orange on there, with also like the dark patches running through the oranges as well. So just mark them in very, very loosely. At this point I actually put the reference photo away and just went with what I felt. So you can see that I'm using like a flat brush here because I don't want to get into too much detail. Forget about the detail at the moment with the body because it would just take forever just to figure out and just copy it. So let's leave the detail, work with the flat brush just to get that colour on there first. And you can see now that I'm using a lighter orange colour, which I've mixed on the palette, and I'm just putting that onto the feathers. And you will work with these colours as you mix them on the palette. Some you will actually mix on the canvas itself, but stick to those three primary colours: ultramarine blue, mid yellow and vermilion red. Play around with the oranges, play around with the blues, but stick to those because you don't want to worry too much about going out and getting a specific peach colour or a specific blue. Try mixing them yourself with the primary colours because it's a very, very great way to learn how to colour mix and how to get different shades of colours from actually mixing the paint on the palette. I'll go back in with the orange, brighten it up or deepen the colour slightly depending on how I feel, how it looks, and you can do this too. But work with it, see how you feel, how it wants to go, and remember at certain intervals just put away that reference photo as well and properly look at your drawing or your painting and see what you think needs to be done with it, whether it needs to be lighter or darker. There is no pressure to make this a perfect painting at all. So I'm using the round brush now. I've put down the flat brush, I got the colour on with the flat brush, and now I'm going to use a brown brush. Just go back in with the dark blue just to build up some of that deep colour again, and also with the white. You know, they say don't use bright white, or painters won't use bright white, but by the time I've actually put water with this or I've put it on as a glaze, it's no longer white. It's like a grey or a light blue or a light yellow, so it doesn't matter too much if you are using that bright white. But you can put the white down. Don't be afraid to do the same with the black also. They don't necessarily use black, but I don't think there's any wrong with putting down a black or a white as a neat colour, because by the time you go back over it or it's mixed in with the colours underneath, it's no longer going to be white. I fiddled around again with some of the head, but I'm going to leave that now, put that away. I'm happy with it. I don't want to touch it again, I just want to leave it. It looks fine to me, it looks right to me, and because I think it looks right, I will leave it. I don't want to fuss too much, don't overdo it. So I'll leave that be, and we'll move on to adding some fluffy parts of the body with some wispy feathers. I'm using the round brush here. I'll just water down the white slightly, just very, very slightly. I'll just do some flicks with it, like flappy motions with the paintbrush, not copying the reference photo. I'll just go with how I feel. You know, I know there were some thin feathers there, and of course, you know, it does need to look like a kestrel, so I'm aware that there's feathers there, but I'm not copying it exactly. At this point, I did think it had a slight problem when it was blending in with the background. It didn't stand out too much. I wanted it to step away from the canvas, where I think the kestrel just merged in slightly with the canvas, so I needed something to sort that out, so it did have that contrast. So what I did is I got a mid yellow and added a little bit of white with it, so it's more of a lighter yellow, and I'll just redefine that chest area with that yellow, and this will give it some distance from the board. It just stands out a bit more. And I also did this around the head slightly as well, around the top of the head. Now the last thing I will do is going with a neat white, a slightly watered down white, not too much. It was just because my gouache was really thick, the white I had was really thick, so I needed to loosen that paint slightly, but not too much with water so that it just did wash away. So I'm going to put the paintbrushes down. I'm not touching it again until the next picture, but that is this Kestrel on linen board finished. Thank you very much for watching. All the materials will be listed below in the description, and I hope you can follow along with me with this tutorial. You will find the final painting on my website if you'd like to paint along too. Please do, and like I said, all the materials are listed below. And if you have done this painting, feel free to send me the images on Instagram or via my website. I'd really love to see them. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time.